to the products you need to know about, to wild places and extreme adventure, bringing it all together in one place. Pull up a seat by the fire, my friend. This is today's Wilderness.
And I'm your host, Kevin Gardner, on today's Wilderness. And my guest today is avid outdoorsman and author David Petersen. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevin. Great to be here.
I've been a fan of your work for a very long time, and this is sort of a milestone for our show. You were the first person I thought of whenever we conceived this thing as having a guest, so this is a pretty big deal for me. But there may be a lot of folks out there who are not familiar with David Petersen and your work, and I'm hoping that just listening to this show is going to excite them to go out and get some of your books, take a look at who you are, the type of things you write about. In my opinion, you're probably, if not the best, certainly one of them. And I'm grateful to have you on the show. Thank you very much. Tell us a little bit about David Petersen, who you are, where you started from, and how you became an author.
Well, I not so jokingly tell my wife, if she could put something on my headstone to honor my life, it would be he was a good woodsman. So that's the way I see myself. I'm an outdoorsman, and everything else that has shaped my life and everything I'm proud of, for the most part, has to do with that. But I grew up in Oklahoma. I'm almost 63. I was born in 1946 in Oklahoma City. It's a big city, but not so big back then, and we lived on the edge of town. And unfortunately, I was an only child, and unfortunately, my father was a bit of a workaholic. He worked 6 days a week, and he was in no way an outdoorsman. He'd grown up in the Dust Bowl Depression out in the Panhandle, and all he, was concerned with was security and financial security and that. So I didn't have any mentors, but I just had this instinct. All I wanted to do was go hunting and fishing and camping and hiking and be outdoors. So the lucky part for me that I had that very, very few young people have today is that I could get on my bicycle, and in 20 or 30 minutes, I could be swimming in a cow pond, I could be fishing in that cow pond, I could be hunting cottontails, quail. We had a lot of quail, squirrels. And while my parents rightfully were pretty strict on me and my curfews on Friday nights and that sort of stuff, they were just remarkably generous about letting me go out in the woods. They just seemed to have some sort of a instinct feeling that I was safer there than I was in the city, and frankly, I still feel that way. I'm certainly saner there. But anyhow, that's how I got into it. I just started doing it, and I had a few friends whose fathers would take them, and so I benefited from that. But basically every weekend I was gone hunting and fishing, and I went through the Boy Scouts till I got old enough that I got a driver's license, and girls suddenly became far more interesting. I think I made it to life. But again, back in those days, all of our leaders were our fathers, and every one of them had been in Korea or even World War II. A lot of them had grown up on farms. So these guys knew about getting around in the outdoors and had these skills that, they're just not so widely available today. So I was really blessed in that way. But other than that, I wasn't real happy where I was living. I always wanted to live on the ocean or in the mountains. And so I got out of there as soon as I could. In 1968, I joined the Marine Corps. And I spent from 68 to 74 in the Marines, wound up being a helicopter pilot. When I got out of the Marines in 74, I was living in Southern California, this great little place called Laguna Beach, and so I pretty much spent, except for a year overseas, spent the whole decade of the 70s there, doing what everyone was doing there back then, including hunting a lot of girls. Let's put it that way. I was lucky enough to meet the love of my life, and she'd been raised there too, Carolyn, and all we wanted to do, what we had in common, was to go backpacking and camping and be out in the woods. We did that every chance we got. So as that place filled up and got more crowded and difficult to live in, we broke out of there in 1980 with everything we owned in the back of a Volkswagen bus and $3,000 between us, and moved first to Montana, settled in a town that just wasn't quite ready for, a couple of young hippies from California at that time, Red Lodge, and basically starved out there in a few months and came down here to Durango in southwest Colorado in the San Juan National Forest to stay with some friends for a while, and just found it very hospitable, and we've been here ever since. Bought a little bit of land out next to the National Forest, 15 miles out of town. Built a little cabin with my own hands. I'm very proud of that. I'd never even built a doghouse before in my life, but we're still living in it almost 30 years later. Quite by accident, I moved into just one of the sweetest elk hunting places in the universe. Just really very good elk. And another thing that is super abundant here is aspen forest. These big, beautiful, white, smooth-barked trees and leaves that tremble in the breeze. And boy, this place just got into our blood, and we've been here ever since, and I'll probably be here till the day I die. So that's, kind of my personal history.
You moved yourself right into the classroom of elk in Colorado. That state boasts, what is it now? I hear different populations, anywhere from 230,000 to 300,000 head of elk, the largest population of elk in any state in the country, and in some people's opinion, in the world. Huge amount of elk. So if you're someone who loves elk and loves the outdoors, you are right in the playground.
You're right, and it shaped my life. And you've got the numbers down right too. That's just about bracketed right. The Division of Wildlife wouldn't want to own up to 300,000 because they already have to pay out a fortune to ranchers for problems with elk. So it's kind of a political thing. But yeah, I think 250,000 elk is fair. And what I've always heard, and once would have been able to quote the statistics to you, but I think Colorado has more elk than all the other states and Canadian provinces put together. We have them in the yard sometimes. I can walk out of my cabin and go hunting, and it just absolutely has shaped my life.
I feel sorry for you. Now, I spent about a dozen years myself in Colorado, and I spent my time up in the Estes Park area, Rocky Mountain National Park,
yeah.
and deer, elk. That is just an incredible area, and that's actually kind of a great segue into some of your most recent work. Your book, A Man Made of Elk. I wanted to talk about that, and perhaps this is a great lead into it. Tell us a little bit about A Man Made of Elk.
Well, it's an anthology. In other words, I've got kind of a checkered history of writing, but for a year and a half I moved to North Carolina and worked for Mother Earth News as 83 to 85. And then I came back as the Western editor and worked for them here until 1989. This was the old Mother Earth News, the old funky back to the land, take control of your own life, Mother Earth News. And I had a column actually on wildlife, and in each issue I would write about a different animal. So that's kind of what got me going there. So my very first writing about elk happened way back then in the second half of the 1980s. And then after that, I got deeply involved with Bugle magazine, which is the magazine published by the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. And for almost 20 years, I contributed more articles to that magazine than any other writer. And because I was writing about the kinds of things that they were interested in at that time, which was educating hunters on the natural history of their prey and their habitat needs, and also talking about trying to start a reform in hunting ethics. And then after that, after I quit working for Bugle, I started doing much the same thing for Traditional Bowhunter magazine, which today, as a semi-retired writer, is the only magazine that I actively write for in every issue, Traditional Bowhunter magazine. So I just, I've got all these years of writing magazine stories. Oh, and I also wrote for a backpacker magazine for several years, and they let me do similar things. So I had this huge body of work, and a lot of it focused on bears, and a lot of it focused on elk. And so I collected what I thought were all of the better pieces on elk hunting that I'd ever written. What differs this book from previous books is this the first book where I've overtly, said, let's go hunting. All my hunting writing and other books on elk and so forth primarily has talked about ethics, the problems with hunting and what we need to do to fix them. Focused on the natural history of the animals we hunt, trying to help people get a better knowledge and understanding and compassion for these beautiful animals we hunt. But I very rarely said, let's go hunting. So this book, that's what it does. I feel I kind of owed it to a loyal following of hunters. So I like to think that it would be of interest to non-hunters too, but this one's for hunters, and it's divided into 3 sections, and one is what we call in the trade Me and Joe stories, and Me and Joe went hunting. So they're stories about hunting, mostly elk, but all kinds of animals, from Arizona to Alaska. And then the second section is how-to, which I almost never have written how-to since the early days, but it's the knowledge I have on how to hunt elk and other animals, specific to bow hunters, but bow hunter skills will just make a rifle hunter a better rifle hunter, too. The difference primarily is proximity to the game. And then the third section, I fall back on what is kind of always been my area, and I talk about ethics and even a little bit about the spiritual aspects of being an ethical sportsman and that sort of thing. So that's it. It's divided into 3 parts, and it can be ordered through bookstores, but it's on my website, www.davidpetersenbooks.com, and I spell my name S-E-N, so it's davidpetersenbooks.com. Pretty straightforward.
And they can get a copy of A Man Made of Elk. It sounds somewhat of a compilation.
That's exactly what it is. Again, it's my own personal selection of what I felt was my best and most entertaining and useful hunting writing from across 25 years of doing it. And I send them out myself. I sign every copy. So it's kind of fun. It's been fun. I always had an aversion to what I call peddling my own wares when I was a writer. I just wanted to be a serious writer and left it to someone else to sell them. But now that I'm not writing so much, I'm getting to know my readers. I finally, quite fun doing this.
A Man Made of Elk, available, davidpetersenbooks.com. That's Petersen with an S-E-N. Looking forward to that one. The one that I find of your books to be most entertaining, one of the few books I've ever read cover to cover. I've got an extensive library, but very few of those books have I ever read cover to cover. And this book I have read cover to cover, not once, but several times. And I'm pretty excited that you just actually are releasing a 3rd edition, if I'm not mistaken, of Ghost Grizzlies. And that come out, May 1st? Is that correct?
Yeah, about that. And it's available now. It's also on the website. Yeah, 3rd edition. The 1st edition came out from Henry Holt, a big New York house, in 1995. It was hardbound. Well, that book was still at the printer, but too late to change anything. More stories were still evolving. So as soon as that book went to paperback, I changed it, and I pulled out a couple of chapters and put in a couple of new chapters and made some corrections and updated it. And that's the book that's been available for several years. And now, most recently, this new 3rd edition, I've updated somewhat, but not extensively. It has a new cover, but the big change there is for the first time it has pictures. It's got 12 pages of black and white pictures in it, which the first 2 editions did not have. Kind of an evolving story, that book is. That's the one book I've written, not because I wrote it, but because of the subject matter, that will outlive me for sure, because in part it's a history. It's a Western history book. A lot of these people are still alive. I just got a letter from the old trapper that killed what was hailed as the last grizzly in Colorado back in 1952. He's still kicking, and he said he's got some pictures for me I haven't seen that I can have, so I can foresee a 4th edition coming out someday.
Well, looking forward. I mean, for folks who've never heard of the book Ghost Grizzlies, Colorado, 1952, and please correct me if I'm in error here anywhere, 1952, this is an animal, the grizzly, that was extinct in Colorado and believed to be extinct, but yet there were continued sightings of grizzly bears by credible people, ranchers, whatnot, and all of a sudden in 1979, one shows up and encounters a bow hunter and winds up being what today we know to be the last known Colorado grizzly. While you were on the western slopes of Colorado chasing ghost grizzlies with Doug Peacock and some other folks and talking with Tom Beck, from the Division of Wildlife and writing this book. I was on the other side of the state a couple of years later doing the exact same thing, only I wasn't writing a book, chasing those stories of people seeing grizzlies in Colorado, and some of these people very, very certain that they see a grizzly bear, and black bears have this brown phase and cinnamon phase. So a lot of people do get confused, but you dedicated a book to chasing the most credible ones, the most credible pieces. I feel you put together one of the best documentaries of what you could call the ghost grizzly in Colorado. It's a great book. It's a great read. It won't let you down. Sometimes it's hard to put down. I read it before I go to bed at night, which lends itself to some interesting dreams. But now living all the way back in Pennsylvania, this show is my closest connection to serious wilderness, and I hope to get back into Colorado. But ghost grizzlies. You went back out with Ed Weissman, who was involved in that 1979 incident, and you retraced the steps. And this book really chronicles those things. Maybe in your words, how do you describe ghost grizzlies?
Well, as I said, what probably motivated me to write the book in the first place was Doug Peacock, who some people may have heard of. His classic book was Grizzly Years. He's this grizzled old Vietnam vet, Green Beret, who came back really messed up and kind of suicidal, and I really didn't care where they lived or not, so he wound up out in the wilderness in Montana and was able to get closer to and stay in the vicinity of and have interactions with grizzly bears that a sane person wouldn't have, because he frankly didn't care if the bear killed him or not, and he just really came to love and respect them, and kind of came up, as quite a cult figure, and probably in some ways knows as much about grizzly bears, certainly their behavior close to people, truly wild bears, as much or more than any biologist. So he and I had gotten to know each other because we were both friends with Edward Abbey, which is another whole part of my life. So when Doug got involved with this search for grizzlies down here in the South San Juan Mountains of Colorado, where the Weissman bear, the last bear, most of the last bears, grizzlies were killed, and kind of one of the wilder places left in the state, asked me to join that search and write about it because he wanted to get some interest and maybe some funding for the search. So I went out and backpacked with them and spent time with them and got quite a bit of information and wrote articles for Wilderness Magazine and for Backpacker Magazine and others. And I realized that there was this tremendous wealth of information out there. I mean, the grizzly bear is important and interesting character in Western history, in my estimation, as Geronimo or Custer or, any of those human figures. And here we had all this drama and these really interesting characters and some of them were still alive. A handful of them were still alive, and others, they had relatives still alive, so the information was there. And it was in bits and pieces, and a lot of it was deeply hidden, and it was really a job of investigative reporting to dig it up. And I had already gotten such a start on that for these magazine articles that I decided to go ahead and turn it into a book, and fortunately a good publisher in New York was believed in it and backed me on it. So I spent almost 5 years in researching and writing this book, and most of those summers I'd be in the mountains for 2 weeks, and I'd come home for a week, and then I'd go back to the mountains, and it, consume my life. So I wanted to collect all these bits and pieces of history, especially the living history, these people that had interaction with these bears while it was still there, and put it all in one place as a bona fide historical document that people could rely on. That was my primary motivation. Another motivation was this search for ghost grizzlies is like, at that time, 91 to 95, there was every reason to believe that there were still at least one or two grizzlies out there somewhere, and we're talking 50 miles as an arrow flies from where I lived, almost in my backyard. So I wanted to get to the bottom of that. Were there any more grizzlies out there or not? Let's find out. And then you get into the political and social aspects of it. Well, what if we find the living grizzly bear? Then what happens? There were people who were rooting to reintroduce grizzlies here. Politically, socially, would that work? What effect would it have on the people living there? What effect would it have on those bears that were brought in here? And then finally, these really interesting characters. Ed Wiseman, who had hand-to-hand combat kind of akin to the old mountain man Hugh Glass, who had hand-to-hand combat with a bear and a grizzly and survived. Amazing story. And then Ernie Wilkinson, who was a federal trapper back in 1951, who killed what would have been the second-to-last grizzly bear in Colorado because another federal trapper then killed one in 52, and that's when the Division of Wildlife declared it extinct. So all those things together, plus just the ability to spend all my time out there running around in the wilderness and get paid at least enough to survive on, I mean, who could pass that up? So it was probably the most compelling and enjoyable, and I would agree probably the most lasting book I've done, simply because the subject matter is so rich.
If you have not seen it, seriously pick up a copy of Ghost Grizzlies, and that too is available on your site, www.davidpetersenbooks.com, and that's Petersen with an S-E-N, www.davidpetersenbooks.com. Ghost Grizzlies is the name of the book. This has been an outstanding experience getting to talk with you about these things. What I'd like to do, take a little break. Let's come back. Let's talk a little bit about some of the work previous to Ghost Grizzlies and A Man Made of Elk. I want to talk about a couple of other ones that are, I think, noteworthy, and maybe some allusion to the future of what is in store for David Petersen, for us. Let's just take a quick break. We'll come right back. I'm with David Petersen, author and extremely avid outdoorsman. We'll be right back.
Bored with the same old outdoor material? Looking for a place that thinks of your passion for adventure and wild places first? The Water and Woods Network offers unique and exclusive material to you, the avid outdoorsman, from sites like waterandwoods.net, home of the popular Water and Woods online magazine. We're dedicated to the outdoors. DeerFever.com, proven deer hunting tips, techniques, and the gear to put that knowledge to work. Get the knowledge, grab the gear. If you have an appetite for the outdoors, then pull up a chair and browse on over to waterandwoodsnetwork.com. Complete and convenient, one-stop shopping access to all of our sites and your outdoor addictions. waterandwoodsnetwork.com. That's waterandwoodsnetwork.com. This is Today's Wilderness.
And my guest today is Mr. David Petersen. He's an avid outdoorsman and very well-established author, one that I have a considerable amount of respect for. We've been talking about some of his most recent work, available at his website at www.davidpetersenbooks.com. Petersen spelled with an S-E-N. Latest books being A Man Made of Elk, as well as a re-release of a 1995, in my opinion, classic, Ghost Grizzlies. Does the Great Bear Still Roam Colorado? And I think you read that book and you'll have a pretty good idea whether you believe they do or they don't. But we're coming back to talk with Dave a little bit about some of the work he'd done in the past. And you have worked with sort of tooling people in becoming outdoor writers, and with that you've written a book, Writing Naturally. It's sort of a how-to book. It's on my list of next purchases. Go ahead, tell us a little bit about your background with instructing people and how you came to doing that, and tell us a little bit about the book Writing Naturally.
I never set out to be a writer. In fact, I never set out to be anything other than to be a good outdoorsman and spend as much time out there doing that as I could. So like a lot of things in my life, it happened by accident, and quite by accident. And in fact, my life has been shaped not toward goals necessarily as much as it has toward escapes. It was always easier for me to see what I did not want to do than it was to see what I did want to do. I knew real early on, I had a stint of a year in law school, for instance, and I could have been a commercial pilot, and I just didn't want to do these things for various reasons. And I guess I just wanted as much control over my own life as I could get. But anyhow, at one point after I got out of the Marines, I was kind of footloose living in Southern California, and I was going to law school at night, and I just wanted a job that I would go there and do it and forget about it and go walk on the beach and read my law books or whatever. So it just so happened I'd been a motorcycle rider when I was younger, very much so. I kind of got out of that. I had totally gotten out of that at that point. But there was this highly respected magazine. It was a national magazine. It was called Road Rider, and the publication offices were just about 3 blocks from where I lived. I didn't own a car or a motorcycle at that time, and so that made it nice. I could walk to work, and I'd already known some of these people who worked there. So back from the years that I read the magazine and was a motorcycle rider. So they needed a typesetter, and this was before computers, and you had to manually type all this stuff in there. So I got that job, and it was like, say, just purposely kind of a dead-end, thoughtless job, but people would type out their stories and send them in, and this was way before this Harley revolution we've got now, but that's the kind of folks it was for. They were mostly middle-class, middle-aged people who owned great big motorcycles, Harleys, and that was just at the time that the Hondas and the other Japanese motorcycles started putting out big motorcycles, but these were folks with big motorcycles, not dirt bikes, strictly road riders, and they would take long trips on these things, and so that's what this magazine was about. People would send articles in, and the editors would go over them with a pencil and make changes and clean them up, and then they would give them to me, and so in the course of typesetting them into this machine that would basically set them up for print in the magazine, I was seeing the changes that these editors were making, and I took an interest in it. And, after a while, I found myself going into the editor's office once in a while and saying, hey, wouldn't this sound better if we said it like this? And to make a long story short, within 3 years, I was running the magazine as a managing editor. It was just a skill I had, editing, that I never knew I had, and I enjoyed it. I liked working with words. There's a lot of fun to be had there. Also, I got to take these trips on motorcycles, and they were, real lightweight technical evaluations, like, how comfortable was the seat after 8 hours, and did it start when you kicked it or pressed the button, and that kind of stuff, and nothing detailed at all. And the other half was travel writing. So we would take a minimum of 3,000 to 5,000 mile trip anywhere we wanted to go on the motorcycle, come back and write a story that evaluated the motorcycle for that kind of thing, and at the same time told what, with luck, would be an interesting travel story. So that's how I broke into writing. I started doing that so I could take some of those trips, and of course, being my own editor, I had a receptive publisher there. So I did that for about 6 years until 1980, and really, like I say, I enjoyed it, and I enjoyed the people, but it wasn't really what I wanted to be doing. I would go to places like Yellowstone and Glacier and all these wonderful places in Montana and Colorado, and I just wanted, I wanted to be out there in the woods that I was riding past at 60 or 70 miles an hour. And so I screwed up my courage in 1980, and my to-be wife and I, as I said, took off to Montana, and I was determined to become a freelance writer. I had no experience beyond that, and don't know how I thought I would ever do it, but my wife took a series of dead-end jobs to support me, and I went back to school to get the veterans' schooling benefits that were still alive then. And gradually it happened. Over a few years, I built up, enough of a clientele, you might say, in magazines I worked for, that I was able to make a very humble living. I never made a good living as a writer, but I'm proud of the fact that I did nothing else but write and writing-related things to support myself for in excess of 20 years. So, and part of the way of supporting yourself as a freelance writer is once in a while someone will pay you a little bit of money to come give a talk about something, and once in a while someone will pay you a little bit of money to come teach a writing workshop, like Yellowstone Institute. I did that a few times, and others. And also the local college here, I got we would, in union terms, a scab job as a professor, but basically, I would come up and didn't have any, tenure or formal association with the college, but I would teach every semester, and I taught writing. And I pioneered a few courses that they didn't have: magazine writing, nonfiction, creative writing, that sort of thing, and did that off and on for about 10 years. So I had assembled, between being an editor, editing other people's work, and writing myself and teaching writing, I had assembled quite a body of experience with it. The Mother Earth News thing was classic, and we can use that for hunters and fishers too as an example. But that magazine needed information, and they didn't expect everyone to be a good writer. What they wanted was their information and their own personal flavor. So people would send in an article about, say, how to make a solar composting toilet or something like that, and we would massage the language around and make it readable. Well, I'd done the same thing for hunting and angling magazines too, off and on, and edited some people's hunting books and stuff like that. So I thought, well, there's all these people out there with these great stories and information to share, but they don't have a clue on how to do it, neither the writing itself or especially the marketing. How do you sell it once you've written it? So I thought I would put that little book together to help folks like that, like the kind of, what would I have liked to have had when I got started in writing. So that's the story of writing naturally. Subtitle, I think, is A Down-to-Earth Guide to Nature Writing. So it's for anyone who wants to write about nature, whether they're a sportsman or not. And try to cover every aspect of the skill of doing it and the business of selling it.
Writing Naturally. That's available as well at your website?
Yes, it is.
And that's at www.davidpetersenbooks.com. Writing Naturally. I'm looking forward to that one. I'm going to hand that along, too. I've got some folks that I think will appreciate something like that. Probably the first book of yours that I owned, I really like a lot. The book is called Racks. And this really is kind of a tribute to racks and animals that have racks, and I think that might even be part of your subtitle as well. But can you tell us a little bit about the book Racks? I think any of the hunters that listen to this show would really appreciate and really learn a lot about antlers and racks with this book. So what can you tell us about that one?
The title was Racks, and the subtitle was A Natural History of Antlers and the Animals That Wear Them. Of course, that's the deer species. This was one of my first books. I think it was about 90 or 91, maybe. Here again, as you just said, I saw a need, and a desire among a lot of people, hunters and non-hunters, to know about these things. Plus, they're just art. They're just amazing. They've been compared to butterfly wings so far as the artistic miracles of nature. And, I became a student of elk and other deer. And, of course, I grew up in Oklahoma bow hunting whitetails. So I'd always loved that. So what I wanted to do and what I did was go through all of every species in the deer family, the whitetail, mule deer, and their various subspecies, caribou, moose, and elk, and detail their individual evolution, where they got started, how they've changed, and, their natural history and life habits today. And also on a bigger picture, things that are common to all those antlered species. Why these ornate, cumbersome things that they carry around on their heads part of the year and regrow every year, and how did that come to be? What forces in nature prompted that to happen, and how do they use them socially today? Just all sorts of considerations like that. Anything to do with antlers. Also talked about the Asian, aphrodisiac antler trade and that sort of thing. So that was that book, and I was very fortunate as I've been throughout my writing career. If I'm proud of my books, I'm proudest of the cover art. I've got some great art on some of my book covers. Just been really lucky to have some wonderful artists agree to let me use their art. And in this case, it's a woodcut artist, I think the greatest one in the country, named Michael McCurdy from New England, and just spectacular woodcut drawings of all the different species that grace the cover and each of the chapters inside. So that was the book. It recently came out, a little press in California called Capra Press, and they printed 5,000 copies, and they just sold just snap bang. It was obviously going to be a good thing. Unfortunately, tragically, the publisher about that time died of cancer. The publishing house went out of business. The book went out of print, and it's never since been reprinted. I got the rights back to it and just haven't done anything with it. And now that I'm semi-retired from writing and only have a little bit of time to put in it, I'm more interested in keeping some of my previous books alive than I am putting out new ones. And this one kind of became a cult classic. There's been quite an active trade in it through Amazon and used book places like that. And a lot of folks like yourself said this was, the first book of mine that they read. And so I will, now that Ghost Grizzlies is back out there, as I have time. It'll probably take several months. I'm going to go through that book. I'm going to update it. I'm going to add a whole lot of new material that wasn't in it, new cover, some more great art from wildlife artist Thomas Aquinas Daly in New York, and republish that book, probably with a new title and everything. So we'll have the spine of the old book, a small book, as the spine or the skeleton of the thing. It will be substantially a new book. So that's my next project as I can find time to do it.
The book is called Rax, and if you haven't got your hands on a copy of this book, I highly recommend it. If you're a hunter, if you're an avid outdoorsman, if you like antlers and racks, I think you're going to really appreciate what David Petersen has done with this book. You work right now with Trout Unlimited, as well as your affiliation with BHA. Tell us a little bit about that. I know this is something that you're passionate about, and it is the future of your work, as well as rewriting or republishing racks in the future, or something similar in name, but the same book. Tell us a little bit about your involvement with Trout Unlimited and BHA.
Trout Unlimited is a full-time paid job, and my title is Colorado Field Director for Sportsman's Conservation Projects for Trout Unlimited. In parallel with that, I'm the volunteer, no-pay volunteer co-chair for the state chapter of BHA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which is a national group, all volunteers, no paid staff. We've got members in 47 states and some foreign countries, and a few active chapters, and our Colorado chapter here is the biggest and most active. So both of those groups are going for the same goals. How it came about was just as my writing career was kind of winding down, because I'd gotten so picky about what I would write about, to the point where, I was about the only one who was going to read it. I wanted to write about evolution and, natural history and hunting ethics, and pretty much saturated the market on that. So things were slowing down, and I wasn't ever willing just to be a commercial writer or to write whatever it took to make money. So it's about 6 years ago, Trout Unlimited, it's 150,000 members, 50 years old this year, world's oldest and largest cold-water fisheries conservation group. They did this remarkable thing, and they hired a couple of guys who were well-known elk hunters and ethicists and conservationists, guys I'd worked with writing, at Bugle for Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and we'd given some seminars together on ethical issues and things like that, and hired them and started this new wing, the Sportsman's Conservation Project, outreaching hunters in general, and especially elk hunters. And the thinking was, sure, Trout Unlimited is a cold-water fisheries group, but that water has to come from somewhere. So traditionally, all these volunteer chapters all over the country had done all this great work saving and restoring their home streams. Wherever you lived, you got involved with taking care of your home stream. At the same time, at least here in the West, these things all head up in the high country. It's almost all national forest land, public land, in wilderness areas and the areas below wilderness areas. And that tap was slowly being turned off by excessive and ill-planned logging, mining, road building, ATV abuse. Just these lands were being abused, and no one was speaking up for them from the sporting community. So they looked around and said, we better keep this tap flowing, or we're not going to have any fisheries downstream, hundreds of miles from here. You go up and clear cut a place, you cause erosion, you screw up the streams by driving through them. All these different forces where gas and oil energy development is huge here. It's just eating wildlife habitat like you wouldn't believe. So TU said, in order to save our downstream fisheries, we're going to start organizing and working with hunters who are the primary users of these high-altitude places, wilderness areas in the area below them, which we call roadless areas. They have no protective designation, but they just don't have any roads in them. So they're sort of like de facto wilderness, but they don't have the proscriptions that wilderness does. You can use motors in them and, that sort of thing. So that's how that came about, and I immediately saw the work they were doing and was envious, and thought, this is the most productive conservation group working today. I don't care, sportsmen, Greens, whoever, they were getting stuff done and organizing people who'd, never been organized in the right way, and in some cases misorganized hunters to, misinformed to believe that you couldn't hunt and fish in wilderness, and that the government was trying to shut everybody out, and all conservation was, were liberal anti-hunters and all this crazy stuff. So they set out to turn that around, and were just doing great work because they'd hired some people who were absolutely well-known, unimpeachable, hardcore hunters. And no one could accuse them of being, liberal Greens and camo or something. So after a couple of years of this, I got offered to join that group, and I did. And it came at just the right time in my life. So all the things I'd been writing about, an awful lot of them, I got to incorporate into this work. And so that's what I do, and we have a staff of about 24 now that do this in most of the western states. It's totally a western project, but it's important to Easterners too, because an awful lot of folks come out here to hunt and fish, and all over the West. And what happens, to the public lands in the West, that's America. It's the best part of America, and it should be as important to people in New Jersey or Pennsylvania as it is to those of us in Colorado and Montana and Wyoming and places like that. And backcountry hunters and anglers formed separately about that time, and with the same goals. And, we just voluntarily are hunters and anglers, and other people, we've got a few members who aren't hunters and anglers, but we're saying, hey, as private land access is disappearing, it's all being leased up by rich people to rent out to rich people, and are becoming condos. And the future of hunting and fishing, and especially anything approaching a wilderness experience, a real traditional American wilderness hunting experience, is totally dependent on our public lands, and most of those are in the West. So we better start saving them. It's like, right now we're burning the furniture to heat the house for a night or two, and then the furniture will be gone and the house will be permanently cold. So that's my volunteer and my paid work both right now, and what little writing I do, I mostly do to support that. And very, very good organizations. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, you can check that out at their website. It's backcountryhunters.org, all spelled together. And that's the national group. And then Colorado is coloradobackcountryhunters.org. Check us out and join us.
Excellent. It sounds like that really pulls your life together, all the things you've done and all the things that you stand for and what you're doing today. And I guess that is the future of David Petersen, probably also going to be the legacy of David Petersen along with the writing. I really appreciate you having spent the time with us today. It has truly been a privilege and an honor to have you as a guest. I would love to have you back again at some point, especially whenever you get some things rolling with the newer book that you're going to re-release. I think we should come back and readdress that. Again, I want to thank you for your time and extend the offer to come back and join us again in the future.
Well, I really appreciate your interest, Kevin, and interest of everyone who's listening in. Thank you so much. The pleasure's all mine.
And you can check out Mr. Petersen's website at www.davidpetersenbooks.com. That's Petersen spelled with an S-E-N. www.davidpetersenbooks.com. Has been my guest today. I'm your host, Kevin Gardner, and this has been Today's Wilderness.